kiss for you.
Talking about Monster Train 2 here because I really enjoyed the first game and it was the only kind of Slay the Spire or roguelike deck builder I ever really got into, which I'll explain obviously why in a second here. But we're talking about Monster Train 2 because I did enjoy the first game, although I wasn't super keen on getting the second just because I thought, more of the same thing isn't necessarily what I needed. I did play Monster Train 1 for a decent bit and got everything I wanted out of it, so I wasn't really super keen on jumping into the new one. But birthday came around, got some extra money, decided, why not? Let's test it out. Got the Switch 2 version, even though there's not a Switch 2 version. It's running the Switch version, but it's running well enough I don't necessarily see an issue, which is the footage you're seeing here. So let's just talk about it. If you are not aware of what Monster Train is, it is fundamentally Slay the Spire, but like multi-layered. And I really do mean layered, like multiple layers. If Slay the Spire is you are buffing and debuffing your character and the enemies in order to be able to clear a floor. This is that and 3 floors plus a heart. So instead of it just being, your guy fighting against everything else, it's effectively 3 of your guys. It's, the first train here is your guys and the opponents, and then the second floor and the third floor, and then the heart, which is your life, and that also has an ability to attack and defend, that kind of thing. And the way it works is pretty similar, right? You kind of have your base cards that you operate on. Most of the time you'll start off with just like basic cards and you place them on whatever floor you have, and then your enemies will come in and they'll go back and forth and try and attack each other with their attack and defense and all their buffs and debuffs and stuff. And mostly I would say what makes this game unique is the fact that obviously it's a multi-layered fight instead of something like Slay the Spire, which is just like you versus a bunch of enemies. Monster Train, and especially the second one, really lets you go crazy with a lot of the experimentation that you can do with the fact that it's 3 layers. So just kind of off the bat, you're dealing with things like a lot more options for build variety, a lot more options for going crazy with what you can build and how much damage it does and that kind of thing, and also what the enemies can do. So instead of just being limited to like, a shield, right, or more damage or negation or healing or anything like that, you can do crazy things like some enemies have haste, which allows them to go from the first floor to the third floor next time they move, right? Or ones that like shift enemies from one part of that of your lineup to the other. Because the way it works is like if you have your guys on the left and their guys on the right, and one of them has an ability to like shift the placement of it, that can affect how things get attacked, right? Usually speaking, the first thing in the row is the first thing to get attacked. And oftentimes, let's say it's a shield guy, right? Well, it's really cool. Well, one of your cards can be shift the front row enemy to the back. Well, now that shield guy's in the back, and whatever it was in the back is in the front, and that back guy's squishy, meaning he's going to die quicker, right? So there's some strategy there at play where you can do that. And same thing for your people as well. So it's effectively like what happens if you took Slay the Spire and you just quadrupled the amount of enemies and the amount of allies you can have at any given time. And, the insanity that effectively comes with that. So that's kind of the general idea of Monster Train. You have a similar idea for like the upgrades, right? Once you complete a floor and you have some kind of mini boss at the end, you can then choose various upgrades along the path. And those upgrades will be, additions to whatever cards you have, more cards, that kind of thing. Upgrades for your main hero card, if you will. There's some other various things. If I try to explain all the mechanics in this game, we'll be here for 3 hours because, these things can get a little bit complicated and, stacking things on top of things. But fundamentally, the reason this is important and kind of the explanation is Monster Train is relatively unique in terms of how it goes about its deck building elements compared to other games. You're not necessarily like restarting every time. You also have a good amount of variety in terms of what you can add and how things synergize, right? It's a lot more flexible. And so because of that, you can get things to be quite complicated compared to other games like this. So I just try and explain it to let everyone know and kind of get on the same page. So now that we know how the normal Monster Train works, what are the additions in the second game? There is, I would say, 2 main additions, and they're very large. A deployment phase, which basically means, hey, you can add your guys to the board before starting. So in the first game, you couldn't, and you just had to start turn 1 with the monsters there while deploying things, which definitely made it a little bit harder to get a good starting deck. But this time, you don't have to worry about that. you can just add guys in the deployment phase, and then you start round 1, so you have a little bit more time and another deck of cards to be able to kind of like boost things. So that technically makes the game a little easier, but it also introduces a little bit more strategy because you're no longer kind of forced to use the cards you got dealt with to start the round. You have that deployment phase. The second thing is the additions to both the pyre options and the room options. I guess technically equipment. I'm going to lump these in with like the room additions, I guess, that you have, or the like level additions, and those are the 3. Room upgrades, which I'm shocked weren't in the original game. Basically, you can transform one rung of the train to some ability. For instance, friendly units get plus 15 attack, or you gain a magic power whenever a unit dies in this room, that kind of thing, right? And you apply those to the room itself. And then there's equipment, which applies to the specific ally or enemy. So you can equip them with like a sword that gains an additional attack when you kill an enemy, right? That kind of thing, that idea. So equipment and then the room effects are definitely very good. And then something that isn't as useful, but is definitely a very nice addition, is the fact that the pyre, the thing above there, used to just be the pyre, the thing that does attack and damage, your heart, effectively your life. Now you can modify it to have different effects, right? So the base one is just, certain amount of attack and defense. And then you have things like the ability to use different items in the shop whenever you get a shop upgrade, right? The ability to take more damage, but every time you take damage, it adds to your attack, that kind of thing. And so those 3 elements really just add a little bit more dynamics. So instead of always having to build out based on monsters, you can be a little bit more flexible and build out based on like the room you're in or the equipment you want to add to your guys. And so there's a little bit more ability to save yourself in the game, I think, than the other game, the first game, where you were kind of just stuck with whatever RNG kind of happened. There's more opportunities when you're building out your deck to add equipment that may drastically improve how good some of the cards are. This does make Monster Train 2 a little bit easier, oftentimes, but I will say that because of that, they've also added substantially more challenge to some things. Now, this gets in kind of a discussion on balance, and then while I do think the balance of this game is quite good, some bosses are going to be a lot harder than others depending on your deck, and that's just kind of how these games operate. I would say it's a lot better balanced than, personally speaking, what the Spire tends to be, which is very unbalanced in favor of the enemies. Again, in my personal opinion, most of the time. This is definitely more balanced than that, but you are definitely going to run into things that are more annoying, like monsters that just like reflect damage sometimes, right? Things that are just like clearly designed and will cripple you if your deck is built on like single hit massive damage, right? Being able to reflect a hit is like really bad for you. So I get some of that, but I think they struck a good kind of middle ground between making the game easier with the additional options and cranking up the difficulty and letting you get higher difficulties. I think is definitely a benefit. And so overall, I'd really recommend the game. It's only $25 on any platform, and I do kind of see where the benefits of the game come from, especially as someone that played the first game a bit, and how drastically improved the rating is. The first one got like an 81. This is saying like an 88, 89. It's like one of the best deck builders, you can buy. And I do really see those small improvements to things like just build options and flexibility that was there in the first game. That was something the first game was praised at, but it didn't have enough that wasn't unit focused. So I think the focus here on things that affect the room and that affect other elements, equipment and stuff that isn't necessarily all focused on units is a dramatic improvement in that regard, and absolutely worth checking out, even if, like me, you played the first one and maybe had gotten your fill. I do think there's enough here to justify a sequel, which is something that I often don't think that sequels tend to do, but I do think this justifies its 2 in its name. It justifies its price point and everything like that, and I do think it's a worthwhile pickup if you're even remotely interested in this kind of game. It's also a very nice game to just hop into, because while the runs are a little bit long, you can save them, which, thank God, most roguelikes for some reason are like, no, you can't save, you just have to die if you don't finish it in time, which is ridiculous, right? So I really appreciate that you can save at any point, and it will save your run, and you can continue from where you left off. So if you have a need of some kind, right, you don't have to complete it all in one run, which I do appreciate. Even saying that, the runs are not super long as well. So you're not going to be spending 3 hours on a run, right? which I also really like. So I'd say overall, I do highly recommend the game. I would say this is probably a review more so than like a Just Gems, although I am going to be qualifying as Just Gems because I do want to kind of showcase like this is a substantial improvement from the first game in a lot of different ways. I want to highlight that. I also want to highlight the fact that, this is a popular game, but it's very easy to write off these games from the visual style and from kind of like your experience with previous deck builders and say, oh, I don't need Monster Train 2. I think you really should check this game out, and it's absolutely one of the highlights of the year. So yeah, if you want to see more of this kind of Just Gems highlighting of games you may not have heard about, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, do all that, and I'll see everyone in the next video.